See that?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. Glad to be able to speak here at Agile Austin. I am normally based in Houston, but today, this week, or this next 2 weeks, I'm in Costa Rica. So coming at you from Costa Rica. My bandwidth is not spectacular, but I think it should be good enough. Hopefully we don't have any technical glitches. But yeah, I had already planned this. I'm not doing a TED cruise and running away. I'm actually was planning to come to Costa Rica as opposed to our great senator. So today I'm going to talk about resilience and agility through evolutionary change and the Kanban Maturity Model. And I think we've been through enough examples of challenges of resilience, and I'm going to go through a little bit about our differences between resilience, agility, and then go a little bit deeper into the Kanban Maturity Model and how we utilize the Kanban Maturity Model in Kanban University for bringing about resilience, agility, and also scale. I mean, the SIG is about scaling, and frequently there's misconception that Kanban doesn't have a scaling model, and the reason is that we don't have a specific Kanban scaling model because it's always been built into. So let me go through that and just a little bit of my background. I am Todd Little. I'm chairman of Kanban University. I've been in the Agile space for a long time. I was involved in starting up the Agile conference, at that time the Agile Development Conference with Alistair Coburn, and then the Agile 2000X series that the Agile Alliance put on. I was on the Agile Alliance board for 7 years, also was the founder of the Agile Project Leadership Network, and on the board and past president of that organization. My background is really deeply rooted in Texas. I'm a petroleum engineer, which is my background, developing software for oil and gas exploration and production. I've been based in Houston for a little over 40 years now. And so deeply rooted, and spent a fair amount of time in Austin over the years as well, as we had was with a company called Landmark Graphics that had an office there, and I was managing a group that was based in Austin. So with that, let me just sort of get into what we're talking about here between the Kanban Maturity Model, resistance, and agility. So when we talk about agility, the way I look at it is agility is actually something that's pretty easy to obtain. Agility, as I look at it, is not specifically defined by the Agile Manifesto. Agile Manifesto is just something that people came up with and said, this is what we believe provides us some agility. I like to look at agility as specifically our ability to change direction, and dogs have agility training. It's really how quickly can we move around, and we can get quite agile by having, even in a chaotic world, we can be quite agile. So agility on its own is not the only thing we care about. What we care about in running a business is resilience as well, and resilience has some similarities to agility. We want agility in order to enable resilience, but resilience is the ability to recover from adversity, the ability to withstand change and difficult times, right? Certainly we've seen that in COVID world. The ability for organizations to survive is basically based on the resilience. And of course, when I signed up for this talk, I didn't realize that I was going to have a brilliant example to pull in from the Texas world. But of course, not long ago, we experienced a real example of a failure of resilience. And in fact, really one where you could talk about the issue where the system was set up for maximum agility, but in fact had real challenges with resilience. So deregulation removed many of the things, the friction that was involved in setting prices and good for consumers. However, when it faced a real challenge, not necessarily a black swan, but what we might call a gray swan being something that could be foreseen, but very rare. And the system that was in place really did not have a good mechanism to cope with such a thing. So the resilience of the system was seriously flawed. And in fact, I was an experience of that, as I lost power for 2 days in Houston. I lost water because, in fact, by not having power, my heat was not on, and so I had real challenges, with many things freezing up. water pipes freezing up, and even pool freezing up, sprinkler valves breaking. So I had a few challenges a month ago, but I fortunately caught them very quickly. So we were home when the water line started opening up, and we were able to turn off the water, deal with it right away. So example of challenges, resilience, and working with that. And this is what we face in business all the time. We've got challenges, we've got risks to deal with, and Kanban is an approach that we utilize that provides us a nice balance of both agility as well as resilience. And it's through the Kanban Maturity Model that we really drive that. So let's take a look first at why Kanban. What is it about Kanban that you should be interested? Why should you care? For one is that we're seeing Kanban applied throughout. This is a survey from scrum.org in 2019. What practices people are using in addition to Scrum. 81% said that they were using Kanban. Now, and this has been growing in prior years. It had been growing almost about 20% of increased perspective on utilizing Kanban. And we're seeing that similarly in the uptake of our business. We're seeing a lot more people taking and being serious about Kanban. Now, my guess is that these 81% of the people that think they're using Kanban are probably just using a board, and they think that means they're using Kanban. What they rarely realize is the depth that Kanban can, that is available for Kanban. Tools for really bringing about agility and resistance. And that's where the Kanban maturity model comes in. So let's look at what we mean by Kanban. What are we talking about when we do talk about Kanban? As I said, many people probably think they're doing Kanban just by having a visual board with a to-do, doing done type of situation. And to some extent, they're right. They are doing some elements of Kanban. This is a starting point. This is visualization. This is visual management. It's a start on the journey towards Kanban. But Kanban is much richer than that. There's much more to it than just a visual board. And visual board, not to take away from the power, visualization is one of our key practices, but it's not the only thing. There's much more to it. What we look at when we're talking about Kanban is that Kanban is a tool for evolutionary change in managing knowledge work. Not just software, but all knowledge work. It teaches organizations how to understand, visualize, and measure systems of work to continually improve and consistently deliver effective results. That's what we're really about in the Kanban method. Continual change, evolutionary change, bringing about improvements in results. It provides a set of proven practices and approaches that scale from individual and teams to the enterprise. That's the scaling story. It's not that we have a specific scaling framework. You scale Kanban by doing more Kanban. That's as simple as it is. The more Kanban you do it all the way through the organization. That's how you scale. It also scales upstream to downstream. We have a very well-developed perspective on what comes before the commitment point. How do we determine what to do? That's our upstream side. The downstream is the delivery. So there's a lot more to Kanban than just a visual board. Some of the elements of the Kanban method. There's change principles, there's service delivery principles, some general practices, and these are all based on a set of Kanban values. So let's take a look at these. The change management principles. As I say, we're talking about change. We're talking about evolutionary change. Not big bang, but evolutionary change. We start with what you do now. So we start with what you do now. We understand the current processes as actually practiced. Not what you say you do, but what you actually do. We spend time to understand that. We understand the system. We learn how you're doing it now because that gives us the ability to make change. Once we understand where the pain points are, we can change. We don't go and reorganize. We don't come and do a transformation. We come in and look at what you do now, respect existing roles, responsibilities, and job titles. We may do some more evolutionary change to change those over time, but at least initially, we don't make a big change. We start with what you do now. We gain agreement to pursue improvement through evolutionary change. Again, we start with what you do now, we get agreement, we're going to improve, we're going to do things to make things better. And we're going to start by doing that by understanding where some of the pain points are, so that we can get everybody engaged in, yes, let's do something about it. and let's do something about it is encouraging active leadership at all levels. So we start with what we do now, pursue evolutionary change, and active leadership. That gives us the feedback mechanism to continue to improve and in our evolutionary change. The reason for this is that it's a departure from traditional change approaches. Traditional change approaches are usually a big bang A to B process. We have our current process, we do an evaluation of the current process, and we say, yeah, we don't like the current process. We need to be doing the future state. We need to be doing some future process. And our future process is defined in advance, and we're going to make a transformation. And organizations love transformations. I've been in organizations that have 3 or 4 or 5 transformations happening at the same time. I don't know how many are successful, but I'm going to guess very few. And the reason very few is because this model basically doesn't work. If you think back to our Agile values, what is a big bang transformation? This is a big design up front. It's entirely against many of our Agile principles to do this type of big type of transformation. The reason being is we don't know what the future state should look like. The future state needs to evolve. In this case, this model, which is very big in the consulting space, has this future process defined in advance. How can we know the future? If we look at this in evolutionary change perspective, if we start with the big bang approach, we're going to have some capability we're delivering on, and over time, that's going to change by introducing some change. So current state is here, we introduce a change, we think we're going to get to a future state, and it's going to be a nice transformation. That's our big bang transformation. But what really happens in real practice? What really happens is something more like this. We make a change, and things get worse initially, right? Because we're going through big transformation, reorganizations, whatever that might be, it disrupts the system. What had been working no longer works. We take a step back, and hopefully, eventually, we get through this, and in the future, we're in better state. This is something that was made popular initially by Virginia Satir, called the Satir Change Model. We see, in her case, she was seeing it working with family issues, predominantly alcoholics, drug addicts, things like that. And they found that they had reached a point of stability where even though they were alcoholics or drug addicts, the family had reached a somewhat stable point. And by changing the system, by removing the issue, which was at hand, the addictive behavior, things actually got worse in the family for a period of time. But eventually, if they stuck with it, then behavior got better. So this is what we call the Satir Change Model. And we see it as well in businesses. The same type of behavior is seen regularly. And the challenge is we've got safety. How bad are we allowing it to get? And before we abandon it. And the other is how much patience do we have? 2 challenges here with this big bang approach. And the other is how well did we really predict the future? Did we really understand our situation well enough? All of these are challenges with the traditional approach. And lower organizations will panic in this behavior because they can't handle either the safety or the patience. And what we've seen in reality, and this is reports from the Project Management Institute, of these types of initiatives, only 18% are really successful, 68% get moderate results, and 18% have failure. And I think we see somewhat similar situations in the world in the Agile space. Jeff Sutherland is on record as saying 58% of Scrum implementations fail to achieve the results that they expect. That's the type of behavior that we're seeing with these bigger bang transformations. Kanban takes a very different approach to this. It says we don't know what the future state is. What we're going to do is we're going to approach this from an evolutionary change, making small increments and let the future state evolve. So these series of small increments through small experiments, we actually look towards how can we continuously improve, guided by knowledge that we've had in the past, what works in the past. And that's where the Kanban works as a roadmap. The Kanban Maturity Model helps us understand some of the practices that people have used in the past to make these improvements. And that gives us this roadmap that takes us to, helps us improve our chance of success. So when we look at evolutionary change, the approach we take is initial process. We evaluate the fitness criteria. Where are the pain points? What can we want to do about it? What are hypotheses about what might work better? And we devise a change. We do the work. We determine how well did that work. If it continued to work well, we roll forward. We continue to look at things, and maybe that didn't work, and we roll back. And maybe we try something else. And we continue this process until we get, to allow the process to be emerged, and we continue and continue and continue. We're never done. The point is we're establishing an idea of continuous improvement and ongoing perspective. So the processes are evolving, and they're done through experimentation. Kanban also takes the approach of being like water, going around the rocks. So we try to understand where is the resistance, and rather than blasting through the resistance, we try to go around the rocks. We utilize flow of the system to say, okay, let's look at where the resistance is. If we can go through the resistance, we may, but let's also look at, can we go around the resistance? And this is part of our change management principles. Let's look at the path of least resistance in order to get the results we're looking for. And if that means going around some resistance initially, we may very well do that. Kanban becomes the great unifier. Since it's a start with what you do now, we could be starting from chaos. We could be utilizing Scrum or SAFe. We could be in Waterfall or CMMI. It doesn't really matter. We start with what you do now, and we'll continue to improve your process. And it may, in the end, not look like at all like what you started with. We may, in the process of adding Kanban to, say, a Scrum implementation, we may start improving the Scrum, and then it might get to the point where actually breaking some elements of Scrum are the preferred approaches. That's up to how things go, or you can potentially stay within the Scrum framework if it's really, really critical and important to you. But Kanban doesn't care. Kanban just says, let's continue to improve. Let's do what works. Not necessarily what worked for somebody else, but what works for you. Understand their context and work with that. So here, let's look at the 6 practices, the core practices, general practices. Visualize, of course, we all know, that's we work with not just the board, but also visualizing everything, visualizing anything we can make. We unhide things that are hidden. We, of course, limit work in progress. By limiting work in progress, we can keep things moving. And that's all in support of the item to the left, which is managing flow. Kanban is about making sure work is flowing. We don't focus on the workers. We focus on how work is working through this, how work is moving through the system. A very important distinction. We don't care so much about the efficiency of the workers. We care about the efficiency of flow. How is flow moving? We make policies explicit. By making policies explicit, we can do something about it. Everyone has a context of how things are working, and we continue to evolve these policies. They aren't something that's set in stone. These are things we continually revise, but we make them explicit. We make it understood amongst all the members of the delivery, and also stakeholders, everyone, that these are our policies. This is what we're working with today. They're subject to change. We'll change them as that makes sense, but this is what we're starting with. We establish feedback loops. Feedback loops can come in the form of the visual board can be a mechanism for providing feedback. The metrics that we collect can be an element of feedback. And as well, the meetings, the cadences that we have are a mechanism for feedback. Now we have to distinguish here between feedback, which is the information we collect, and feedback loops. The difference I tell you with the feedback loop is that act of leadership. Let's do something about it. That closes the loop. If we just hold a meeting, and I see this many times that in Agile teams, whether Scrum or even Kanban, they hold the meetings, they hold a retrospective, and they have a great time holding a retrospective, but they do nothing about it, right? They just identify things. They don't actually take action. It's the taking action that closes the feedback loop, and that's what's really critically important. Only through taking action are you actually doing something about it and having a real closed loop system. And then finally, improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally. This is an approach of continuously improving, right? Again, taking action, hypothesis and action, hypothesis, measurement, and action, right? That's how we continuously improve and evolve our system. So let's look at this in pictures. Visualize being an important element of us. we have a system, and our system is not just one Kanban board, but multiple systems that we're looking at and how they're interrelated. We're starting with ideas. We have a funnel, the upstream. This is coming in and having demand into the system and then flowing through the system. We want to see how we're eventually delivering the system. Hello? Okay, yeah. Okay, and how are we delivering? What's the service that we're delivering? What is the prize that's coming out at the end? How do we get there? So we visualize the system. We understand the system. We use an approach called static. Static is a systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. We want to start introducing the Kanban. We want to understand where are the pain points, how does the system flow, and what do we want to do about it? So a specific approach that we use for that. We want to focus on flow. How do we think, how does the work flow through the system? We balance demand and capacity. There's multiple approaches we have for shaping demand and also for improving our capacity, what our capability is to deliver. We limit WIP. That helps us with making sure that we're flowing through the system efficiently. We look at bottlenecks. How can we improve bottlenecks so that they are not a problem and improve overall flow? We look at scaling out, both scaling backwards to the upstream sides, as well as scaling horizontally and all different directions of scale. And we do this by focusing on how their systems are connected, managing the interconnections, managing the dependencies, and then doing more Kanban, using the Kanban toolkit to help us with scale. Eventually, we also collect metrics. So we look at lead times, things like lead times, scatter plots, cumulative flow diagrams. Through this measurement, this provides a feedback. Now the feedback loop is doing something about it. What do we do with these metrics? How do we improve the system? What does the system tell us we should be improving? And what are the knobs we need to change? We also look at the feedback from the results. How is our service quality? Are there things we should be delivering differently? That feedback is another loop. So we have a fitness improvement through the feedback. These are all parts of the elements we're trying to accomplish in the Kanban world. So now that takes us to the basic introduction to Kanban. Now we'll lead into the Kanban maturity model. Maybe before I go there, we can see if there's any quick questions on Kanban. And so let's look at will the slides be shared? Yeah, I'm not able to see or hear you. You hear me okay now?
Hi, Todd. Avnish here from Sweden. Thanks for a great insight. It's eye-opening. There are many things I didn't know about Kanban here. I was wondering if you would be talking about cycle time and throughput and things like that later in the presentation.
I'm certainly happy to go there. I was not going to go into depth on that, but I certainly can. Maybe we'll get through the presentation. If there's time left, I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about cycle time, throughput, and how they're connected. And
yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. And I see that you asked, will the slides be shared? And yes, I'll make the slides will be available.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Any other quick questions while we're at a nice break point? All right. Well, if not, I will, and you can continue to put questions in the chat. I'm unfortunately only on a single screen, so I'm not able to see them, but also you can interrupt me if you absolutely have a question you'd like to address at that point. Okay, so let's move on to the Kanban maturity model and where are we coming at from the Kanban maturity, the rationale. Oops. So why do we need yet another maturity model? There's lots of maturity models out there, and things that have worked, things that haven't worked so well in terms of maturity model. We've come about the Kanban maturity model. We believe that one of the challenges that many maturity models have is they look to be predictive. And that is that the traditional maturity models start with the perspective, I've got inputs, I've got processes, and I want to get some predictable outputs and results. And if you look at maybe maturity models in the manufacturing world, what they tend to focus on is really conformance to practices. If I can get predictable inputs and if I can get predictable processes, the idea is that should lead to predictable outcomes and results. And sometimes that works. In low uncertainty situations, this can work perfectly fine. The difference is that in knowledge work, we're not dealing in low uncertainty situations. We're dealing in high uncertainty, or certainly moderate uncertainty situations. And in these situations, the outcomes and results are not necessarily predictable from inputs and processes. We actually have to work through the system in order to understand that. If those of you familiar with the Kanban model, this is the difference between the complex space, where in fact the cause and effect is unknowable until you actually work through the system. You have to set a probe through the system in order to understand the behavior of the system. And that's the approach. That's sort of the approach we take from it, is that we want to work from empirical process control. My background is chemical and petroleum engineering, so process control is sort of natural to me, and some partially why I think I migrated to the Agile space. And in this, what we're looking for is a difference. We, instead of focusing on inputs and processes, we focus on outcomes and results. We look at, are we getting the outcomes and results we're looking for? And based on the outcomes and results we're getting, we use feedback loops to modify the process and possibly also modify inputs. So it's a different approach. The Kanban Maturity Model is not a model of focusing on conformance to practices. It's focusing on, are we getting the results we care about? If it's a result we don't care about, we don't even deal with it, right? We said, if you're interested in this result, then here are some practices that in history have shown to give us those results. So it's a looks backwards as opposed to trying to predict forward. And this brings about, I think, really both resilience and agility. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So the Kanban Maturity Model has been around for a few years. We just released version 2 of the Kanban Maturity, second edition of the Kanban Maturity book. And the Kanban Maturity Model, we map around 150 or more specific Kanban practices to observable business results using 7 levels of organizational maturity, starting out sort of at an oblivious level and chaos sort of, down to built for survival, where we're really reinventing the organization. What we found, the rationale for the Kanban is to eliminate the 2 of the failure models in Kanban and Agile implementations. We see this frequently, these 2. One is overreaching. We're starting from chaos, we're oblivious, and we say, oh, we need to be like somebody else, all right? And somebody else might be at that fit for purpose level. Well, the organization's not really ready for that. They don't have the maturity to take on many of those practices. So this is an overreaching problem. They overreach, just like those big bang transformations, they overreach and they fail because they're not capable of doing it. They're not ready for it. The other one we see frequently is false summit plateaus. An organization has some pain point, or a team has some pain point. They do something about it and they're happy space again. So they're now feeling really good about themselves. I'm seeing some chat. Okay, if there's anything that you really need me to address on chat, just feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I'm going to come back to it later. So just so we'll see where we're at. So yeah, so some plateaus is we get some results and we're out of our immediate pain. But the challenge here is that we could get so much better. We could be reaching out to the next level. So we may be perfectly happy because we're no longer feeling the pain we had at the lower level of maturity. But we leave things on the table because we could be even higher and higher. And this is the types of things we see in Kanban, teams that instill an idea of continuous improvement, continuing marching along and get better and better, and get the results accordingly. They can get significant doubling of results. We see this type of behavior regularly. So if we look back at our picture here from the Secure Change model, what's the difference? What are these 2 challenges we're seeing in terms of overreaching and plateauing? One is this overreaching here. We try to take on too much and that creates a problem. The other one is the false summit plateau. We get a little bit of improvement, but we miss out on the big possibility of improvement if we were to continue to improve. So that missed benefit. So let's look at this in more detail, going through each step of the maturity model. What are the behaviors that we're seeing? What are the challenges we're seeing? So starting at maturity level 0 is oblivious. It's the my way. lots of people, everyone's busy. There's no shortage of busyness, right? Everybody's busy, but what are they producing? Lots of individualism, unpredictable, unreliable service delivery, overburdened people. What's the result? Unhappy customers, unhappy managers, unhappy people. There's really, people are busy, 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 but frustration is enormous. So what do we do about it? Well, we start with some of the basics. We visualize work at the team level. Just get some things visualized often helps get us out of this mode. We limit work in progress. We stop being busy. We start finishing, stop starting, start finishing, right? We define some initial policies, make sure that how people are working, get some agreements across the organization, get across the team. And we start some simple feedback loops, get the Kanban meeting going so we can coordinate activities. We're not just working as individuals, we want to bring this together. These are some of the types of things we can do in order to get ourselves out of maturity level 0. We have one situation here, and where normally we say, we advance about one level, we only want to advance one level. But this is one example. We have found that we can advance from level 0 to level 2 and bypass level 1. That's one of the, we can go directly beyond this in some circumstances. So we'll go into that a little bit more. How things look once we get into the team focused approach. We still have issues. It's not the same, never the same way twice. There's still individual heroics, and the teams themselves are not connected. So we have individual teams think they're doing great stuff, but when you look at the overall service delivery, these teams are not coordinated well and not delivering the results expected. So the type of problem statement, this is an example, a specific example from an Agile coach at an internet equipment manufacturer. Every team reports that they deliver on the commitments, but I know that customers are waiting longer than 6 months for delivery. That's the type of thing we see at a level 1 maturity. So what do we do about it? First we look at what do they have. They're usually looking at maturity level 1 team Kanban boards, so they do have at least visualization of the work at the team level, but it's not necessarily coordinated beyond the team level, and it's very rudimentary types of boards. Really, to-do doing done types of boards at the team level is a fairly common type of thing we see. Challenges: there's a lack of service orientation. The team people are just doing tasks and things. They're not really looking at across the service. What's the service that's actually being delivered? They're localized metrics and objectives to the extent that there are any metrics or objectives. There's no real customer recognizable work items. Again, oftentimes just tasks and I'm doing my part. There's lack of collaboration across the service delivery workflow. A team may be active and doing their work, but where there are multiple teams involved, there's really no coordination across the service delivery. So what do? We look at static systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. This is an approach that helps us understand how is the system actually working. In fact, in the situation where there are more than one team involved. Let's look at it from a systems perspective. Let's look at how things are flowing, where are the pain points, what can we do about it? We look to drive towards customer recognizable work item types, service-oriented workflow board, and we start looking at a flow review. How is our flow happening? This is sort of something we introduce probably on a weekly basis of looking at how is the flow and how is the system working. So this takes us to a level 2 maturity, which is frequently in the form of an aggregated team Kanban board. So in this case, we can see we've got a little bit more maturity here. We've got, you're starting to see specific elements. And in this case, it's aggregated team. There's multiple teams here. There may be a delivery team 1, there may be another delivery team, and then maybe there's a deployment or testing team of some sort. Or no, this is another development team. So 3 different teams that have the board, but as you can see, each one is passing something off through that infinite. If you look at that done queue for platform development, you'll see an infinite WIP limit. That means that there's no guarantee of flow. We can't guarantee flow across the system because there's no policy of limiting the work in progress before it flows on. So this is an improvement over level 1, but it still doesn't have us a really guaranteed flow. And that's where we move on to level 3. So the customer-driven, level 2, we have customer-driven. It's challenges, never the same result twice. Here, we've reached to the point where we're out of individual heroics, but now we're at managers performing those heroics. delays and last minute tension despite coordinated team effort. So we haven't really gotten to a whole system level. We're sort of piecemealing the system together through this aggregated teams. Types of problems we see, you haven't looked at the lead time chart in months. That was a software development manager at a telecom equipment manufacturer. That's the type of behaviors, things that are sample behaviors at that level. We asked the question, is a service delivery manager role present? Do we have someone actually looking after the flow? If we don't have someone looking after the flow, then it's a whole bunch of managers maybe who are individually looking after things, not someone looking after the whole. Are customer expectations understood and communicated? Do we have that across the entire service, or is each group working independently? And then do we have a service delivery review happening? So beyond the flow review, service delivery is then looking out across the service delivery, potentially across multiple teams that are involved. That's what helps us take things to the next level, which is level 3. We also ask, are there any blockers? Are we looking at blockers, blocker management? We're looking at blocker likelihood and impact. Is there any sort of risk review? And then we ask the question, what does the lead time chart look like? We had the question about lead time. So is our lead time something that has a reasonable degree of predictability? Is it thin-tailed, or does it have a fat tail? Fat tail means that our range is very long. If our range of lead times is very, very long, our predictability will be poor. So that's one of the things we try to do is look at can we manage that? Can we take a fat tail? If our lead time distribution is fat tailed, let's do something about it. Let's take some proactive measurements, some proactive measures that help us reduce that distribution. Maybe we need to look at causes of delay. What are the causes of delay, and what can we do to improve that? Maybe it's dependencies. What can we do to do better dependency management? What are some of the blockers? What can we do about that? So it's taking some action, not just looking at it, but actually taking the action to do something about it. That's what takes us to the next level, which is, again, that level 3. So the things we implement, we start implementing reporting lead time and doing something about it. We have the service delivery manager role. We do a service delivery review, blocker metrics, risk reviews, and really try to focus on, are we meeting customer expectations? What do we need to do to really drive towards customer expectations? Looking at fitness criteria, how well are we doing, and what can we do about it? This takes us to really a full pull system. What we call a full pull system, we have an end-to-end workflow from the commitment point. The commitment point is the point where we get where we bring the ideas and say, yes, we are going to work on it. We have an agreement between the service request manager, the customer who's requesting it, and the service delivery and the team, the service delivery group, that yes, we commit to it and we're going to take it, right? So there's a synchronous or a symmetric commitment between the requesting it and those that are going to deliver on it. Said, yes, we're going to do this. And then that until the customer is going to take it up, which in this case is the UAT perspective. So the first unbounded queue, and we have predictability because we have WIP limits all the way through here. By having the WIP limits all the way through here, we can guarantee a predictable flow. Now, what we have to do with the other thing we have to look at from the WIP limits is we don't want to have the WIP limits so low that they starve the system. So we're looking for an optimal point at which we can make sure that the system is delivering. But here at level 3, we've got a very nicely behaved system, and it's very basically we have gotten to the point now where we have predictability and we have happy customers. So fit for purpose, predictable delivery, no more heroes, processes are well under control. We can take that to the next level, and we say we still have potential problems here. We've just put out a release on time, met our commitments, but our product management team responded with a WTF is this. That was from a product in Berlin, a mobile application, Mobile. There's a case study that we have on this. So they haven't quite made sure that they've got the feedback loops to make sure that the customers are satisfied. And that's what we're really trying to drive towards. Yes, we've got predictability, but do we have all the feedback loops in place to make sure that we're meeting on customer expectations and that the customer is happy with the final results? Not necessarily what they ask for, but are they happy with the result? Are we making the adaptations and adjustments in order to meet what they they really need. So the challenge in this organization, this situation, was that work items weren't meaningful and understood by the customers. They had an asynchronous commitment, which meant that they were not agreeing that there was a difference in both. It was not symmetric, nor was it at the same time. So there was a push almost of, I want this, and the delivery team had to take it up. So it really wasn't owned jointly between the product management organization and the delivery organization. We really wanted to get to that joint ownership. They were pulling from a partially committed buffer. They were not having a replenishment meeting. We have replenishment meetings regularly, is our recommendation, to make sure that we've got alignment and agreement on where are we going, replenishing the buffer. So what did we recommend? Implementing a 2-tier Kanban board. We have new coarse-grained work item type, which is understood by customers. And we want synchronous commitment, symmetric commitments as well, basically ownership by both sides. We're in this. We want skin in the game on both sides. The full replenishment meeting with customers present, synchronous commitment. Customers commit to the coarse-grained work items. So there's commitment from the customer side, not just from the delivery team, but also from the customer side. Get that shared agreement. So now we're at maturity level 4. We're risk hedged. Everyone is happy. There's no more surprises. We've really got a well-performing system here, and everything is going pretty well. Just without specific examples, we move on to like maturity level 5. We're the market leader, simply the best. Marginal gains, attention to every detail. At this point, we're improving not because we have to, we're improving because we want to, right? And we just want to be the best in the market, and continue to improve just because we can. And finally, maturity level 6, we're built for survival. It's the reinvention. So we're already really good, but what we realize is that situations are changing, and every once in a while, when those situations change, we have to be able to redefine ourselves, create a new identity, a new purpose, and take a market to a new level. And that's really what the high level of maturity organizations and leaders are able to do. So looking at things and how, what we have seen from actual organizations, Vanguard, a year or two back, actually a couple of years back, implemented the Kanban Maturity Model. And they had been an organization that had been utilizing Scrum for a while in the situation. And they came in a large part of the organization, and they introduced an option to take and work with Kanban, either to enhance their Scrum or to potentially evolve it. So if we looked at the control chart, and they didn't actually have the control chart during the times that they were operating under Scrum, because it's not necessarily something that Scrum teams would necessarily look at, but they did implement utilizing control chart. And in the control chart, we're looking at ranges of lead times as items are delivered. So if you see here in the early stages, in that August 2018 perspective, you see ranges of lead times anywhere from just over a few days to upwards of 180 days. So a very, very long lead time distribution. And so with that, you have very low predictability. And what they started to do after 90 days of working with Kanban and implementing it, their average lead time dropped drastically. So you can see that black line showing how lead times drop, average lead time dropped over time. And the other thing that's important is you see the red box which says nothing here. So where there's nothing here, that means that they didn't have any long lead times anymore. So they were actually able to trim the tail effectively, trim these long tails, and really had nothing, once they've been pretty far advanced, they had nothing that was in the 40 days plus lead time. So a very effective implementation here, and utilizing really the reference of the Kanban Maturity Model to help them continually advance. There's a case study on our website, the Vanguard case study, which is really well-written, long case study about how to utilize Kanban, how they utilize Kanban, and the results they got. This is just a summary of some of the pictures from that. They called it Scrum stall. They had not gotten, they'd gotten some initial results from Scrum, but it stalled out. And this is really that plateauing. that I mentioned earlier. They sold out with their Scrum. They weren't able to find out how to improve it. And Kanban gave them the tools to take that stalled improvement and take it to new levels. And that's what they got through Kanban and through the Kanban Maturity Model. System lead time improved by 78% in approximately 90 days. So major improvements in system lead time, which means improvements also in their throughput and also improvements in their predictability. All of this work to help them with their flow and predictability. If we look at the cumulative flow diagram, you can see here the perspective that when they were at roughly KMM levels 1 and 2, which is sort of where they were when they were in the Scrum world, is in that team level, levels 1 to 2. By taking things to the next level, they were really, you see with a cumulative flow diagram, you're looking at the bottom line. How fast is that bottom line? What's the slope of that bottom line? And you can see that they've improved almost 400% or 4x improvement in throughput by taking on the improvements from the Kanban Maturity Model and getting to level 3. We see this also, these types of improvements regularly. This is another example from the Kanban impact at Accenture in Brazil. And you see, this is just something that they posted on Twitter or LinkedIn, I can't remember. But you can see Ante's KMP1. So before they took our KMP1, our Kanban system design training, and then after they took the training, how did they improve? And you can see the throughput, the slope of that the purple line, drastic improvement after implementing Kanban. We see these regularly. This is the type of thing that we're able to do with Kanban because we start focusing on the things that matter. We start focusing on flow. We start focusing on throughput. And more importantly, I think, is we spend the time to help people understand their system, understand their context, and the tools that help you understand the context help you make those decisions, make you able to make the decisions to improve your flow. So it's the tools that we have available. So just a final note here, it's the organization that matures, not necessarily the Kanban that matures. It's the same Kanban, right? We know these techniques, but it needs the organizational maturity in order to be able to use some of these tools. And as the organization matures, and it's not matures in terms of, a lot of organizations are very old organizations, have been around for a long time, but their maturity from a perspective of management of knowledge work may not be very mature. They may be using old techniques. So taking that organization and the culture and the behaviors and values, taking it to a new level, that's what matures, and that's what enables the Kanban implementations to go to this level. So with that, that's basically the talk, resilience and agility through evolutionary change and the Kanban maturity model. Now would be a great time to start looking at additional questions, and I'll see what's already in the chat. And also, anyone who would like to chime in, please feel free.
I have a quick one. Hello.
Sure.
It's just a small point on your diagram, and this always irritates me, is development, then testing. I always bring the two gay using XP. So I'm sure that was just sort of a sample, just to educate people, but I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, what we do is we're non-judgmental as to how Kanban doesn't care how you are doing things. What it says is, let's understand how you do it now, and let's model what you do now. And then based on what you're doing now, maybe you'll discover that that's not the right thing to do. Maybe it's better over time to start looking at what could you do utilizing great tools from extreme programming, test-driven development, BDD, however you might want to do it, to bring some of those things up front. And that's actually one of the things that we do love about Kanban, is that you can take whatever you're at, right, and start implementing and experimenting, running an experiment. How does test-driven development work for us? Now, the thing with test-driven development, from my experience, is you have to run that test for a long time. You don't get immediate results all the time, because again, that can be a fairly high maturity engineering practice. And we don't address that. We're just addressing. But if you can do, the idea of, again, is from Kanban, we want to build quality in. So again, yes, absolutely agree with you. If you can bring testing forward, if you can bring quality forward, not necessarily testing, because you want to. You rarely can test quality in, right? You can design quality, you can build you can build quality in by good practices. And what we do in Kanban is say, okay, you're starting now with a model where you've got functional silos between development and testing. We're not going to force you to reorganize in order to continue to work. What we are going to do is try to surface that let's work the best we can now, and then let's look at, well, maybe when the organization is ready for it, let's try some experiments about shifting this around a little bit. And that's what
Great.
Kanban enables.
Yeah, thanks. Good point.
On quick time check, we got 5 minutes left. And if we start at the top of the chat from questions, Kanban Maturity Model from Sherry C. Are we getting results we care about?
Okay, let me scroll up here a little bit so I see the actual. Okay. Where are we getting results we care about? I'm not sure I'm seeing that one. Okay, are we getting results we care about? Absolutely. So when I said are we getting results we care about, we could look at a situation, perhaps the difference, say, between a startup organization and a very, very I won't say mature organization, but an organization that has been around for a long time. That has some say maturity around their product definition, let's say that, where they know what their market is. They have different things they care about. An organization that's been around for a long time, the thing they may care about most of anything is predictability. Predictability may be the most important thing, and they may not care that much about discovery of new product ideas because they think they know it already. And maybe they should care about it, but they may not. So they have a different perspective on what they care about than, say, a startup organization. A startup organization may not care about predictability nearly as much as they care about discovery of what the customers actually need and want. What will customers pay for? So there's a difference in where you're at and in context as to what you care about. And if predictability is not a big issue for you, then you might not care to worry about the practices that help improve predictability, right? So it's a matter of understanding the full context of the business outcomes that matter. And if they don't matter, then we don't necessarily worry about it from a Kanban maturity perspective, right? We look at what matters and then continue to improve on that. And that's what the mapping helps us with. It is that mapping of these practices help us with these outcomes. If we don't care about the outcomes, then we're not really going to care about those practices, although they're still there and you might want to look at them, but that's not what we're really focused on. We're really focused on trying to improve outcomes all the time and the outcomes that are aligned with what you care about.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question is from Camel, who writes, could we state that in traditional model there is feedback, but it takes longer to be absorbed by the system?
You can. I've seen traditional approaches where there's very little feedback, and which is part of the problem. The assumption is that everything's predictable, and the feedback is well, I'm not getting the results, so do more of what I told you to do. And that's not a good situation, because in fact that's basically ignoring the reality of the feedback. I would say this is that there may be feedback, but the feedback often is ignored or misinterpreted in some other framing, because the mindset is that I can predict things in advance. And if the mindset is I can predict things in advance, the feedback is frequently taken, the information that comes out of the system is taken as, well, I'm not getting what I expected, therefore I must not be doing what I thought I was doing. So I need to really focus on it. And you hear this all the times I've seen it with Agile coaches saying, well, okay, I'm not getting the results I want. Well, you better do Scrum right then. You better follow exactly what you were taught. My perspective on Scrum is that if you were doing exactly what you're taught, you haven't evolved at all. You haven't taken any. You haven't really retrospected at all, because you're not making any changes. So I think that's, and not to say that's the bad thing about Scrum. Scrum's a great tool and wonderful, but it's about the feedback and improving it. And at the extreme, and this is where traditional maturity models have that challenge, they believe in the get-go, they can predict the future. And if you do, then you just say, I need to do more of what I told you to do.
Okay, Thanks, Todd. And then we had a question from Marcello. Which transformation process would you recommend for an organization practicing Scrum wanting to transition to SAFe?
Okay. Well, abandon that and use Kanban. Oh, no, sorry.
And
No,
say,
so SAFe is the nice thing about SAFe from the Kanban perspective is that there is SAFe has a lean perspective, and Kanban is capable within you can implement Kanban within SAFe all the way from the team level to the portfolio level. So that's the element of it that I think is valuable. I think if someone is currently at the Scrum level and wants to advance and wants to look at SAFe, first question is why, right? Why do you want to move towards SAFe? Is there something that SAFe is going to bring that you're not able to get from Scrum? So I think start with why. Once you do that, then you're looking at, well, the other thing I would say is, after asking why, is are there other answers that might be able, other ways to do it that might give you better results or similar results before jumping on the assumption that you want to transition to SAFe. So I would start with those two, right? Now, assuming that you then say, yes, I absolutely need that because SAFe provides me the ability to scale, and I've got to have scale because I have all these, I've got massive coordination issues that I have to deal with. I think that SAFe can provide some solutions there. I think the other thing, I think there's so many people that are operating and jumping on the SAFe bandwagon just because it is, it looks, I would say it looks safe to organization, to executives, because it makes it sometimes feel like they don't need to change. I think unless you do some reflection and understand exactly what you're trying to do and fit the context, it's really dangerous to just jump on a framework that solves somebody else's problem. That's why we really, we stay away from that. We don't see Kanban as a framework. We see Kanban as a management method that helps you understand your own problem. So it's a difference. I don't know that I can give you a great answer because I don't know, without knowing the context, you can't jump on it, right? So I'll stay away from it.
Thanks, Todd. And final question, and we'll wrap things up from Kamel. In the Vanguard model, what did they change in their Scrum practices to bring in the improvements? Was Scrum totally replaced?
I'd have to, I don't know specifically. I know they've started bringing in Kanban practices. In the specific Kanban practices, I know they brought, they started measuring lead time. By measuring lead time, they actually saw that it exposed them to issues. So I think that was one of the start points. The other thing, they started implementing a lot of Kanban practices, some of the meetings. They started changing their mindset a little bit towards more of a focus on flow. And so there's a number of different steps they went through in order to continue their improvement. I think the other thing they did is they did focus on limiting work in progress. That's one thing that I have seen effective Scrum teams that focus on, keeping their work in progress low by keeping their batch sizes very small. But I've also seen a lot of Scrum teams that ignore the work in progress. They take on more and more and more. And the result of that is they end up with very poor lead times, very poor predictability.
So Todd, that's a behavioral thing. It's not Scrum itself. It's the education behind it.
Totally. This is a behavioral thing. Like I said, I've seen very, very effective Scrum teams that limit their WIP very well. And that's great. Those are the higher performing Scrum teams. So you're right. It's a behavioral pattern that we try to really focus on. And Scrum does too. So Scrum says, don't have large batch sizes, right? Keep them small. But people do some, people don't understand it well sometimes.
Yeah.
So
for if you don't mind me just jumping in, for Scrum teams and you want to stay Scrum, you can use a lot of the elements of Kanban in there. In fact, I generally have my teams use those elements if we're doing Scrum, because they do facilitate a lot of good practices and do help get those high performing teams. So, this is all very good information, but if you continue with Scrum, I suggest use some of Todd's ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I strongly recommend Agile coaches to be as well-versed as they can, understand Scrum, understand SAFe, understand Kanban. All of the tools are there to work in Scrum. There's a lot of common underpinnings between Scrum and Kanban. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, also extreme programming. Extreme programming has some great tools, especially for keeping, understanding how to keep quality high. So we understand all of these. Agile coaches should really be broad and understand all of these tools, and they do work together. Right? Scrum and Kanban work peacefully together, and I think actually many of the high performing Scrum teams I see do a lot of things that, even if they're not actively utilizing Kanban tools, a lot of what they do looks like they knew it, right? Because it's very common underpinnings. So.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate all the answers. And I know we ran a little bit over time, but wanted to get to everything in the chat. So, and just final wrap up, anything else you wanted us to know before we all head off?
No, happy to connect with anyone. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask more questions, I'm happy to do work with that. And so really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk with you, and hope to follow up with a few.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much, Todd. Really appreciate it. The recording and slide will be shared out on the meetup page later on today. And so thanks to everyone for your time and attention and sticking with us past the hour. So appreciate it, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. That was great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.